Commander Yoon dragged Lieutenant Park through corridors filled with smoke and chaos. Her shoulder screamed with every movement, blood leaving a trail behind them like a map for any Keth who cared to follow. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Park was barely conscious, his weight heavy against her side, but his legs still moved, still tried to support himself, even though his body had every right to give up. "Commander," he mumbled through swollen lips, "you should not have come back. Shut up and keep walking." The odds were, I said, shut up. They reached the junction and Yoon paused to get her bearings. The station shuddered around them as another explosion echoed from somewhere distant. Chai's voice crackled through her communicator. "Commander, the consortium ship has deployed Marines. They are breaching the main docking bay, but the Keth are falling back toward your position. They are not retreating. They are regrouping." Yoon looked at Park. He met her gaze with his one good eye. "How many shots do you have left?" "5. "Give me 2. "Park, you can barely stand." "I can still shoot." She handed him her sidearm. He checked it with hands that trembled but did not shake. "Which way?" "Forward. Always forward." They moved through the smoke together, 2 broken soldiers refusing to fall behind them. The sounds of pursuit grew closer ahead. The emergency docking bay waited like a distant dream. Warlord Catharak led the pursuit personally. His blade was still wet with human blood, and his mind was still churning with questions that had no answers. He had conquered 17 worlds. He had broken countless warriors who believed themselves unbreakable. But he had never seen anything like what that human woman had done. She had already escaped. She had been free, and she had come back, not with an army, not with a clever plan, just herself and her willingness to die. He caught up to them in a corridor near the emergency bay. The male human was leaning against the wall, weapon raised, while the female worked on a sealed door behind him. "Surrender," Catharak commanded. "Your consortium rescuers are still fighting through my forces. They will not reach you in time." The male human did not lower his weapon. "Then, I guess we keep fighting. You can barely stand. I can stand enough." Catharak felt frustration boiling in his chest. Why do you refuse to accept reality? You are wounded. You are outnumbered. You have no chance of survival. Why do you keep fighting? The human's bloody face twisted into something that might have been a smile. "Because she is behind me. Because there are people counting on us. Because giving up is not something we know how to do. That is not a strategy. That is not even logic. It is just stubbornness." "Yes." The human agreed. "It is." The door behind him slid open. The female human grabbed his arm and pulled him through. Catharak lunged forward, but the door sealed in his face. He slammed his fist against the metal hard enough to dent it on the other side. He could hear them moving, still fighting, still refusing to die. He had them trapped. The emergency docking bay was a dead end. His forces would breach that door in minutes, and then it would be over. But even as he thought this, he heard new sounds. From beyond the door, voices not human. Consortium Marines calling out positions and securing zones. The rescue force had arrived from another entrance. Catharak stood frozen as realization washed over him. The humans had not been trying to escape. They had been buying time, just like the male had done in the cargo bay, just like the female had done when she came back for him. They had never expected to survive. They had just been holding the line until help arrived, and now help was here. Subcommander Vreth appeared at his side. "Warlord, we need to fall back. The consortium forces are overwhelming our positions. If we do not retreat now, we will be captured." Catharak did not move. "Warlord, tell me something." "Vreth, in all your years of service, have you ever seen a species like this?" Vreth hesitated. "No." "Warlord, I have not. They do not make sense. No, they do not. And that is what makes them dangerous." He turned and led his forces toward the escape pods. The battle was lost. But the war for understanding had just begun. Ambassador Telvers found the humans in the medical bay 3 hours later. The station had been secured. The Keth forces had fled. The hostages were safe. And Ensign Chai had managed to disable the charges in the reactor core. With minutes to spare, Commander Yoon lay in a treatment pod, her shoulder wound sealed, but her body exhausted beyond measure. Lieutenant Park was in the pod beside her, unconscious. But Stable Telvers stood between them and watched their vital signs pulse on the monitors. Ambassador. He turned to find Admiral Saleth of the Consortium Rescue Force standing in the doorway. The Admiral was a tall creature with silver scales and ancient eyes that had seen more than most species could imagine. Admiral, I have been reading your preliminary report. It is quite remarkable. It is the truth. 3 humans held this station against a Keth invasion force. 3. 1. Fought alone against overwhelming odds to buy time for civilians. 1 worked in isolation to restore station systems and call for help. And 1 walked back into enemy territory to save a single life. Admiral Saleth moved to stand beside him. The Keth warlord said something interesting when we captured him. What was that? He said the Consortium made a mistake accepting humans, not because they are weak, but because the galaxy is not prepared for what they are. Telvers nodded. Slowly, I think I understand what he meant. Do you? Humans do not calculate survival the way we do. They do not weigh their own lives against others and choose the logical path. They follow something else, something that makes them willing to die for strangers. Something that makes them come back when any rational species would run. And what do you call that something? Telvers thought about everything he had witnessed. The quiet determination in Park's eyes as he volunteered to hold the rear. The steady hands of Ensign Chai as she worked alone in a dying station. The blood on Yoon's shoulder where she had taken a blade meant for her subordinate. I do not have a word for it, he admitted. But I think it is the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. He paused, and perhaps the most beautiful. Commander Yoon stirred in her pod. Her eyes opened slowly, and she looked around the medical bay with the careful assessment of a soldier who never truly stopped being on guard. Ambassador, Commander, how are the others? Safe. All 11 survivors made it to the Consortium ship. The Torvian delegate is recovering well. He asked me to thank you. Good. And Park. He will live, thanks to you. Yoon closed her eyes. Not just me. Chai kept us alive. Park bought us time. Everyone played their part. Telvers leaned closer. Commander, may I ask you something? Go ahead. What you did, coming back for Lieutenant Park when you had already escaped. What do humans call that? Yoon was quiet for a long moment when she spoke. Her voice was soft. We do not have a special word for it. It is just what you do. You do not leave your people behind. That is it. Telvers stared at her. That is it. Yes. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. I know it does not make sense to you. It does not always make sense to us either. But when someone needs help, you help them. When someone is in danger, you protect them. And when someone is left behind, you go back. Not because you think you will survive. Not because the odds are in your favor. But because the alternative is something you cannot live with. She closed her eyes again. Now please let me sleep. I am very tired. Telvers stepped back from the pod. He looked at Admiral Saleth, who had been listening in silence. Do you understand now? The Admiral asked. No. Telvers admitted. But I think that is exactly the point. He walked to the observation window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Warlord Keth Ark was fleeing back to his empire. He would tell stories of what he had seen, stories of humans who did not know how to surrender, stories of a species that defied every law of survival that the galaxy understood. And those stories would spread. They would reach every corner of known space, and the galaxy would begin to understand what the Consortium had truly gained when they accepted humanity into their ranks. Not warriors, not strategists, something far more unsettling, a species that simply refused to give up on themselves, on each other, on anyone. Telvris began composing his official report in his mind. He already knew what the title would be: Human Survival Doctrine, a threat assessment. But as he watched the stars and thought about everything he had witnessed, he realized that threat was the wrong word. What humans represented was not a threat. It was a promise that no matter how dark the galaxy became, there would always be someone willing to stand against the darkness, someone willing to fight impossible odds, someone willing to go back. That was the truth the battle had exposed, and the galaxy would never be the same. Ambassador Telvris had studied humans for 30 years. He had read their literature, analyzed their history, observed their representatives in consortium meetings. He had written papers on their psychology and given lectures on their potential value as allies, but nothing had prepared him for this. He crouched in a service alcove with 10 frightened survivors, listening to Commander Yoon's footsteps fade into the darkness. The human woman was going back towards certain death, back to save a single soldier who was probably already dead. "This is madness," the Torvian delegate whispered, his voice weak. "From his wounds, she will accomplish nothing. She knows that." Telvris replied. "Then why?" Telvris thought about the question. He thought about everything he had witnessed since the attack began, the way the humans had grown calmer as the danger increased, the way Lieutenant Park had volunteered to die so strangers could live, the way Commander Yoon had tended to wounded aliens with the same care she would have given her own species. "I do not think humans calculate survival the way we do," he said finally. "They are not weighing odds or measuring outcomes. They are following something else, something that does not make logical sense. Then they are fools. Perhaps they understand something we do not." His communicator crackled. Ambassador Telvris. Ensign Chai's voice came through. "I am opening the path to the emergency docking bay now. You should have a clear route for the next 10 minutes. And after that, I do not know. The Keth are moving patrols everywhere. I am doing my best to track them, but there are too many." Telvris gathered the survivors. "We move now. Stay close and stay quiet." They emerged from the alcove and made their way through corridors that had been sealed. Just minutes before Chai was true to her word, every door opened at their approach. Every barrier lifted as they passed. It was as if the station itself was helping them escape. But Telvris could not stop thinking about the humans they were leaving behind. Commander Yoon, walking alone into an army. Ensign Chai, trapped in the station's core with no way out. Lieutenant Park, chained and bleeding and facing execution. 3 humans, 3 strangers who had no reason to die for any of them. And yet they were all willing to do exactly that. Why? Telvris whispered to himself. A young Velith trader heard him and responded with a soft hum. "I asked a human that question once. Years ago? When I first joined a mixed-species trading vessel. What did they say? She said that humans believe in something called karma, that the good you do comes back to you eventually. But I do not think she truly believed that was why." Then, what was the reason? The Velith's hum shifted to a lower frequency. She said it was because she could not look at herself in the mirror if she walked away from someone who needed help. She said the guilt would eat her alive. That is a strange form of selfishness. Is it? Or is it the most unselfish thing we have ever encountered? They reached the emergency docking bay just as a consortium patrol ship dropped out of hyperspace beyond the station's windows. Telvris allowed himself a moment of hope. Then he heard the explosions from deep within the station, and he knew the fight was far from over. Commander Yoon reached the storage section near the main hall and paused to catch her breath. Her body ached from hours of crawling through tight spaces and climbing through access shafts. Her wounds from the initial explosion had reopened, and she could feel blood soaking through her uniform. But she was close, so close through the ventilation grate above her. She could see into the diplomatic hall. The Keth had gathered their hostages in the center of the room, surrounded by armed guards at the front. Chained to a pillar was Park. He was still alive, barely his head hung low, and his breathing was shallow, but he was alive. Warlord Catharex stood before him, addressing the assembled hostages in a voice that carried across the hall. You see, before you, the price of resistance. This human thought he could stand against the Keth Dominion. He killed 9 of my warriors before we brought him down. 9. And for what? To delay the inevitable by a few hours. To give his companions time to hide in the darkness like the vermin they are. He turned to face the hostages. The consortium has failed you. They promised protection, and they delivered nothing. When this station burns, the galaxy will see the truth. The consortium is weak. The consortium cannot save you. Only strength matters. Only power. Yoon studied the layout of the hall. The main entrance was heavily guarded. The side passages were sealed, but there was one route the Keth had not considered: the chemical storage room adjacent to the hall. She had noticed it on the station schematics during her briefing. It contained industrial cleaning supplies, solvents, compressed gases, all highly flammable. She crawled through the ventilation system until she reached the storage room, dropping down silently. She began her work. It took her precious minutes to rig the containers. She was not building a bomb. She was building a distraction. A cloud of smoke and fire that would fill the hall with chaos and give her the opening she needed. She set the timer for 3 minutes and climbed back into the vents. Her communicator buzzed. Commander. Chai's voice was urgent. A consortium ship just arrived at the station. They are demanding the Keth stand down. How are the Keth responding? They are not. They are accelerating their timeline. The execution is happening now. Yoon looked through the grate and saw Catharex drawing a blade, ceremonial, curved, designed for a single purpose. 3 minutes was too long. She burst through the grate and dropped into the hall. The Keth spun toward her, weapons rising. She fired twice, dropping the guards nearest Park. Then she ran, not toward the exit, not toward safety, toward her lieutenant. She reached him just as Catharex swung the blade. She threw herself in front of Park, and the edge caught her across the shoulder instead of his throat. Pain exploded through her body, but she stayed on her feet. She turned to face the warlord with blood running down her arm. You want to execute someone? Execute me. Catharex stared. And her? You came back, alone, wounded, against impossible odds. You came back for this single soldier. He is not just a soldier. Yoon said, he's my responsibility. I brought him on this mission. If anyone dies for that, it should be me. The timer in the storage room reached 0. The explosion shook the hall, and smoke began pouring through the ventilation system in the chaos that followed. Yoon grabbed Park and dragged him toward the nearest exit. Keth warriors scrambled to respond to the fire, to the screaming hostages, to the consortium ship now broadcasting demands through the station speakers, and through it all, Catharex watched the 2 humans disappear into the smoke. He did not order his soldiers to pursue. He was too busy trying to understand what he had just witnessed. A human who had already escaped had come back, had walked into certain death to save a single life, had put her body between a blade and her subordinate without hesitation. Why? What possible evolutionary advantage could such behavior provide? What logic could explain such absolute disregard for self-preservation for the first time in his long career of conquest? Warlord Catharex had no answers, only questions, and a growing suspicion that the Keth had badly miscalculated what humans truly were. Warlord Catharex had conquered 17 worlds. He had broken armies and shattered empires. He had stood in the ruins of civilizations that had believed themselves eternal and watched their survivors kneel before his banner, but he had never encountered anything like the creature bleeding on the floor before him. Lieutenant Park Song knelt in chains at the center of the diplomatic hall, surrounded by the corpses of the soldiers he had killed before his capture. 9 warriors, 9 trained killers who had conquered species across the galaxy, dead at the hands of a single human with a species across the galaxy, dead at the hands of a single human with the hands of a single human with a cleared tongue, standard issue sidearm, and whatever he could find in a cargo bay. Catterick circled the prisoner slowly, studying him the way he might study a new weapon or a strange piece of technology. "You fought well," the warlord said. "Better than any of the soft species in this pathetic consortium." Park did not respond. His face was a mask of blood and bruises, one eye swollen shut. But the other watched Catterick with an unsettling steadiness. "I have questions," Catterick continued. The other survivors fled into the station's lower levels. "You will tell me where they are going and how many remain." "Silence. Your cooperation will determine the manner of your death. I can make it quick, or I can make it last for days. The Geth have perfected the art of keeping prey alive long past the point where death would be a mercy." Still nothing. Catterick stopped his circling and crouched down to meet the human's gaze. "You do not fear death. I can see that. But surely you fear pain." "All creatures fear pain." Park's lips moved, cracked and bleeding. "Pain ends. Is that supposed to be wisdom? It is just the truth. Pain ends one way or another. But if I talk, the people I am protecting die. And I have to live with that. I would rather not." Catterick stared at the human for a long moment. He had interrogated prisoners from dozens of species. He knew the signs of false bravery, of defiance that would crumble under the right pressure. He saw none of those signs in this creature's eyes. What he saw instead was something that made his scales itch with unease. Acceptance, not the resignation of prey that had given up hope, something deeper, something that looked almost like peace. "You truly believe you will die here," Catterick said. "Yes. And yet you do not beg. You do not bargain. You do not even curse my name." Park's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Would any of that change anything?" "No. Then why waste the energy?" Catterick rose and turned away from the prisoner. He walked to the observation window and stared out at the stars, trying to understand what he was feeling. It was not respect. Respect was for equals. And this human was clearly inferior in every measurable way. Weaker, slower, shorter-lived, lacking the natural weapons that the Keth possessed from birth. And yet Sub-Commander Vreth approached from the side. "Warlord, our patrols have swept the upper levels. We found evidence of the survivors' passage, but have not located them yet. They are being guided by someone who knows the station well." "The other human," Catterick said, "the female." "Yes. Our scouts report she is former military. A combat mech who served in the border conflicts. Another warrior. It would seem so." Catterick turned back to look at Park. "What is it about your species? You are so fragile. Your bodies break so easily. You have no claws, no venom, no natural armor. By every measure, you should have been prey on whatever world you evolved. And yet here you are, defying an empire that has crushed 100 stronger species." Park met his gaze. "Maybe that is exactly why." "Explain." "We grew up surrounded by things that could kill us. Everything on our world was stronger, faster, more dangerous. We survived anyway. Not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by refusing to quit, by helping each other, by fighting together against impossible odds. It is not bravery. It is just what we do." Catterick felt something cold settle in his chest. It was the same feeling he had experienced only once before, when he was young and had cornered what he thought was wounded prey. That prey had turned out to be far more dangerous than it appeared, and the scar on his shoulder still ached on cold nights. Prepare him for public execution. Catharak ordered Vreth. I want every hostage and every member of this pathetic station to watch. Let them see what happens to those who resist the Keth Dominion, and the other humans. Find them. I am beginning to think they may be more trouble than they appear. As Vreth moved to obey, Catharak remained at the window. He watched his reflection in the dark glass and wondered why his hands would not stop trembling. Commander Yoon moved through the maintenance corridors like a ghost. Her years of combat training guiding each step, she had left the survivors in Telris's care, trusting the Scytheran ambassador to lead them to the emergency docking bay. Once, Ensign Chai opened the sealed sections. Now she was alone, heading toward the heart of the occupied station, toward Park. Toward whatever waited for her there. She paused at a junction and checked her weapon. 7 shots remaining, not nearly enough to fight her way through the Keth forces, but she was not planning to fight, not directly. She was planning something far more dangerous. She was planning to make them choose her. Communicator buzzed softly. Commander. Chai's voice came through. I have found something in the Keth communications. What is it? Their timeline. They are planning to destroy the station in less than 3 hours. They have already planted charges in the reactor core. Yoon closed her eyes and took a slow breath. 3 hours. That was how long she had to save Park, stop the Keth, and get everyone off this station. 3 hours to do the impossible. She opened her eyes. Can you disable the charges? Maybe. I would need to access the reactor control room directly. But Commander, that is on the other side of the station from the central core. I cannot be in both places at once. Then you need to make a choice. Yoon said, keep the communications open and guide the survivors to safety. Or try to save the station, which is more important. You cannot ask me that. I just did. Silence stretched between them. Then Chai spoke. Her voice small but steady. The survivors are what matter. If they escape, they can tell the galaxy what the Keth tried to do. Even if the station is destroyed, the truth will come out. Yoon felt pride swell in her chest. Good answer. Ensign, keep the paths open. I will handle the rest. Commander. How? I have not figured that out yet, but I will. She cut the connection and continued forward, somewhere ahead. Park was waiting somewhere ahead. An army of Keth warriors stood between her and her lieutenant. She was one person with 7 shots and no backup. The odds were impossible. She kept walking anyway, because Park had bought them time. With his blood, because Chai was risking everything. To keep them alive, because 11 survivors were counting on her to find a way, and because she had made a promise years ago. On a burning colony world where she had been the only survivor, she had promised herself that she would never leave anyone behind again. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, never again. The maintenance tunnels beneath Velix 9 stretched like the veins of some massive sleeping creature. Dark and narrow and filled with the constant hum of machinery that kept the station alive. Commander Yoon Jae led her small group of survivors through passages that had never been meant for anything but repair drones. Ambassador Telris had to bend nearly double to fit, his crystalline form scraping against the ceiling with each step. Behind him came the wounded, supported by those still strong enough to carry them. A Torvian delegate with burns across his carapace leaned heavily on a young Velith trader whose humming had gone silent with fear. Yoon counted 11 survivors, including herself, 11 lives that depended on her, finding a path through a station that was now enemy territory. How much further? Telvis asked, his voice strained from the awkward position. The inner emergency shelters are 3 levels below us. Yoon replied, there is a junction ahead where we can access the main descent shaft, and if the Keth have already secured it, then we find another way. They pressed on through the darkness, and Yoon found her thoughts drifting to Park. She had seen soldiers sacrifice themselves before. She had held dying men and women in her arms during the border conflicts, felt their last breaths against her cheek, but it never got easier. It was not supposed to get easier. A soft sound made her raise her fist, and the group froze ahead through a grated section of floor. She could see movement Kef soldiers patrolling a corridor below them. She counted 6, all heavily armed, all moving with the casual confidence of warriors who believed they had already won. Yoon waited until they passed, then signaled the group forward. They reached the junction without incident, and she allowed herself a moment of hope. That hope died when she saw the descent shaft. The Kef had sealed it with an emergency bulkhead, the kind that required command codes to open codes she did not have. There must be another route, Telvra said. There is, Yoon answered, but it takes us through the station's central hub, right past wherever the Kef have set up their command post. A weak voice spoke from behind them. I can help. Yoon turned to find a young human woman she had not noticed among the survivors. She wore the uniform of a station engineer, and her face was pale with exhaustion and fear. Ensign Chai Mai-Ray, the woman said. I was working in the power distribution center when the attack started. I know the station systems better than anyone. Can you open this bulkhead? Chai shook her head. Not from here, but I can restore partial control of the station from the central core. If I can reach it, I can open paths for you and maybe even get a distress signal out to consortium patrol ships. Yoon studied the young engineer. She saw the fear in her eyes, but she also saw something else, the same quiet determination that she had seen in Park. The central core is in the opposite direction from the shelters. Yoon said, you would be going alone. I know, and you want to do this anyway. Chai straightened her shoulders. Lieutenant Park stayed behind so we could escape. If I can reach the core, maybe his sacrifice will actually mean something. Telvers made a sound that might have been disbelief. Another human choosing death over safety. Is this a disease among your species? Not death, Yoon said quietly. Purpose. She reached into her belt and pulled out a small communicator. Take this. Once you restore communications, contact me on this frequency. I will guide you to safety after. Chai took the device with trembling hands. Thank you, Commander. Do not thank me yet. Just stay alive. The young engineer nodded once and disappeared into the darkness of a side passage. Yoon watched her go, then turned back to her remaining survivors. We need to find shelter until Ensign Chai completes her mission. There is an abandoned storage section 1 level up that should be defensible. They climbed through access hatches and crawled through spaces meant for cables and pipes. The Torvian delegate's breathing grew labored, and Yoon called a halt to check his wounds. The burns were worse than she had thought without proper medical treatment. He would not survive the day. She did what she could with the limited supplies in her emergency kit, and the Torvian grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Why do you help me? He asked, his compound eye searching her face. I am not of your species. I am not of your world. You owe me nothing. Yoon finished applying the burn salve before answering, you are hurt. That is enough, but resources are limited. Logic would suggest you save your supplies for those more likely to survive. For your own kind, logic would suggest a lot of things. Yoon admitted, I have never been very good at giving up on people. The Torvian released her wrist and settled back against the wall. Your species is very strange. Commander, I am beginning to understand why the consortium debated so long before accepting your membership. Telvris, who had been listening in silence, spoke up. What do you mean? I mean that humans do not behave like any species we have encountered. The Torvian said, they do not calculate survival odds the way we do. They do not prioritize their own genetic legacy above all else. They form attachments to strangers and will die for beings they have known for mere hours. It is unsettling, and yet, Telvra said slowly. We are alive because of exactly that behavior. The Torvian made a clicking sound that might have been agreement. Yes, that is what makes it so unsettling. Yoon stood and moved to check the corridor ahead. She did not have time to explain human psychology to aliens who had evolved under completely different pressures. She was not even sure she could explain it. All she knew was that Park was probably dead. Chai was alone in hostile territory, and she had 11 lives depending on her to find a way out. She would mourn later. She would process the trauma and the grief and the survivor's guilt when there was time right now. There was only the next step and the next, and the next. An hour passed before her communicator crackled to life. Commander Yoon. Chai's voice came through, broken by static but unmistakable. I have reached the central core. I am restoring systems now. Relief flooded through Yoon's chest, but she kept her voice steady. Excellent work. Ensign, what is the status of the station? Bad. The Keth have taken the main docking bays and the diplomatic hall. They are holding hostages there, including, Chai paused, including Lieutenant Park. He is alive. Yoon closed her eyes. Are you certain? I intercepted their communications. They are planning to execute him publicly to break the morale of any remaining resistance. But Commander, there is something worse. What could be worse? They are not just here for hostages. I found orders in their encrypted channels. Once they have what they want, they are going to destroy the entire station and blame it on the consortium. They want to start a war. Yoon opened her eyes and found Telvris watching her. The Sithran had heard everything. Then we cannot simply escape. Telvris said, if the station is destroyed with all these delegates aboard, the political fallout will tear the consortium apart. I know, Yoon said. She looked at her small group of wounded, terrified survivors. Then she looked at the path leading back toward the center of the station. Ensign Chai, can you open the sealed sections between us and the emergency docking bay? Yes, but Commander, that route takes you right past the main hall where they are holding the hostages. I know, Yoon said again. She turned to Telvris. Get the others to the docking bay. Once Chai opens the paths, you should have a clear route. And what will you be doing? Yoon checked her weapon. I am going to get my lieutenant back. The trading station Velix 9 floated in the darkness between two empires. A place where species who would never trust each other on their own worlds could meet and speak without fear. Commander Yoon Ji-hae stood near the observation window of the diplomatic hall, watching ships drift past like silver fish in a black ocean. She had served the Galactic Consortium for 12 years. First as a combat medic in the border conflicts, then as a diplomatic attaché assigned to protect negotiations that others considered beneath their attention. Today was supposed to be simple. 6 minor species were meeting to discuss trade routes through the contested sectors near Keth Dominion space. Nothing that would change the galaxy. Nothing that would make history behind her. Delegates from worlds she had only read about filled the circular chamber with the sound of a dozen different languages. The Torvians clicked their mandibles in rapid conversation with the Sithran ambassador. The Veleth delegation hummed low frequencies that made the floor vibrate beneath her boots. Lieutenant Park Song appeared at her side without a sound. He was young for his rank, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen what the universe could do to the unprepared. The perimeter sensors picked up something strange. About an hour ago, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Defying strange. A ship entered the outer detection zone, then disappeared from our screens before we could identify it. Yoon turned from the window, cloaking technology. The station commander says it was probably a sensor malfunction. And what do you say? Park met her gaze without hesitation. I say we should move the delegates to the inner shelters and request an early departure clearance. Before Yoon could respond, the station shuddered. The lights flickered once, twice, then shifted to the deep red of emergency protocols. Screams erupted from the delegates as a second impact rocked the hall. Ambassador Telvris, the Scythian diplomat, rose to his full height, his crystalline skin catching the red light like frozen blood. "What is happening?" he demanded, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance of his species. Yoon was already moving toward the main doors. "Park, get them organized and ready to move." She reached the doors just as they exploded inward. The blast threw her backward, and she hit the floor hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. Through the smoke, she saw figures emerging, tall, armored, moving with the predatory grace of born hunters. The Keth had come. They poured into the hall with weapons raised, their scaled faces twisted into expressions of contempt. At their head walked a warrior larger than the rest, his armor marked with the symbols of 100 conquered worlds. Warlord Ketharek surveyed the screaming delegates with the calm satisfaction of a predator who had cornered easy prey. "Secure them," he commanded. "Kill any who resist." Yoon pushed herself to her feet. Her ears rang and her vision swam. But she had survived worse. She found Park pulling a wounded Torvian delegate behind an overturned table. "Side exit," she said. "Now." They moved through the chaos like ghosts, gathering survivors as they went. Ambassador Telvris joined them, his long limbs folding to help support an injured Veleth trader. "This is madness," the Scythian hissed. "The Keth would not dare attack a neutral station." "They just did," Park replied. "Save the politics for later." They reached the side corridor just as Keth soldiers spotted them. Plasma bolts scorched the walls as the group fled into the station's maintenance tunnels. Yoon took the lead, her memory of the station's layout guiding them through passages that most visitors never knew existed behind them. The sounds of pursuit echoed off metal walls. Ambassador Telvris moved beside her, and she noticed something odd in his expression. Not just fear, but fascination. "Your heart rate," he said. "It has decreased since the attack began." Yoon did not slow her pace. Adrenaline management. "No," Telvris insisted. "I can sense the vibrations of biological systems through my skin. When the other species panicked, their vital signs spiked beyond dangerous levels. But you and your lieutenant became calmer. How is this possible?" Park answered from behind them. "You think about dying before the battle starts. You accept it. Then when the fighting comes, there is nothing left to fear." Telvris fell silent, but Yoon could feel him watching her with new eyes. They emerged into a cargo bay filled with shipping containers stacked 3 stories high. The emergency lighting cast long shadows that turned every corner into a potential ambush. Yoon raised her hand, and the group stopped. "I hear them," Park said quietly. "2 directions. They are boxing us in." Yoon scanned the bay. There was only one exit that led deeper into the station, toward the emergency shelters that could withstand a direct assault. But reaching it would take time they did not have. "I will hold them here." Park said it was not a question or an offer. It was a statement of fact. Telvris stepped forward. "That is illogical. You are one soldier against an unknown number of enemies. You will die for nothing. Not for nothing." Park replied. He checked his weapon and moved toward the rear entrance. For time. "Lieutenant," Yoon said. Park paused but did not turn around. "Make it count." He nodded once and disappeared into the shadows. Yoon led the remaining survivors toward the far exit behind them. The first shots rang out, followed by screams that did not belong to Park. Ambassador Telvris kept glancing back, his crystalline features shifting through colors that Yoon did not know how to read. "Why does he do this?" the Scythian asked. "Because someone has to," Yoon answered, "and he has the training. But he will die. Probably." They reached the exit and Yoon began working on the emergency release. The sounds of battle behind them grew more intense, then suddenly stopped a moment later. A single shot echoed through the bay. Followed by silence, Telvris closed his eyes. "It is over." "No," Yoon said. Pulling the door open, "He bought us time. Now we use it." She pushed the survivors through the doorway and into the tunnel beyond as she sealed the door behind them. She allowed herself one moment to mourn. Then she buried that grief deep and kept moving. They had a long way to go. And Park's sacrifice would mean nothing if they did not survive behind them in the cargo bay. Sub-Commander Vreth stood over the wounded human, who had killed 9 of his soldiers before finally falling. The man was still breathing, still staring up at him with eyes that held no surrender. "What are you?" Vreth whispered. The human did not answer. Vreth ordered his soldiers to bind the Wynal prisoner and carry him to Warlord Keth Arak. He had a feeling his commander would want to see this creature for himself, because in all his years of conquest, Vreth had never seen anything fight like that, and he had never seen anything refuse to die with such absolute stubbornness. The hunt was far from over, but Vreth was beginning to wonder if they truly understood what they were hunting.